When Star Trek aired in the mid-60s, there were two big aspects that made it stand out. Firstly, it was a sci-fi show that wasn't like Buck Rogers. It would deal with credible, intriguing stories and concepts without the campiness. Second, Star Trek would show a bright future where humanity cooperates with many races in a spirit of understanding and mutual betterment. The tumultuous history of the original show and its legacy is well documented, and it was succeeded by a popular and much-loved continuation, Star Trek: The Next Generation. In the early 90s, as the original series movie run was concluding, and The Next Generation was preparing to boldly go to the silver screen, a new live-action series was pitched that would be significantly different from previous iterations of the franchise. Deep Space Nine would boldly go exactly nowhere, as it followed a very distant space station in what would unexpectedly become a very important piece of galactic real estate, a wormhole to a distant and unexplored quadrant. Abandoned by the occupying force of Cardassians above Bajor, the planet that they had brutally subjugated, the storytelling and actual location of Deep Space Nine had a darker tone and style. It was far from the coziness and convenience of the established Federation, set within a melting pot of different races and cultures with radically different ideas from those originating on Earth. It proved that decisions and actions have consequences when you can't just warp away with a quip and order of "engage" before an episode's credits roll. This is a look at those moments in front of and behind the camera that would define a show that was originally the black sheep of Star Trek, but has since become a rightly venerated fan favourite of the series. Defining Moment 1. The pilot, the emissary, airs. Gene Roddenberry had died many years before Deep Space Nine went on screen, but he had reportedly given his blessing for his right-hand man, Rick Berman, to develop a new live-action series. This would be the first show that would go on the air without the great bird of the galaxy around. Star Trek was in good shape and ready to continue. The successor series, The Next Generation, was in full swing, but the end of its TV run was on the horizon. Deep Space Nine would take over, continuing the Trek presence on the small screen. Right off the bat, there were some eyebrow-raising elements that were a real departure for the series. The main cast weren't all Starfleet officers, and this wasn't a Federation starship where everyone was bound by the Prime Directive as it sailed among the stars. We see individuals like Major Kira clapping back against the Federation's presence. We explore an alien space station vandalized by the Cardassians who have reluctantly vacated it. Our protagonist, Benjamin Sisko, even overtly strong-arms Quark into staying on the station against his will. We also see his venomous reception of the lead of the Next Generation, Jean-Luc Picard. It's kind of a bold move to have your new hero accuse the current torchbearer of the franchise of murdering your wife. But that does happen. We saw officers with families. The show would tackle religious themes and lead into the idea that the Federation ideals may not apply when the situation is less than ideal. The pilot was a critical and ratings success, being hailed as the highest rated syndicated series premiere in history when it broadcast. It was a very strong start. After a fantastic start, the show largely stumbled through the first season, trying new ideas to find its identity. Cueless, Move Along Home, Forsaken, these were some big swings that missed and showed it was likely better for this show to forge its own identity. Battle Lines, In the Hands of the Prophets, and especially the amazing duet, were examples of the concept and the style working. Defining Moment Number 2, Season 2, Episode 1, The Homecoming. Season 2 starts, DS9 dives into the Bajor stuff, and it tentatively tries serialized storytelling. Unrest from Bajor towards the Federation's presence bubbles to the surface, without doubt helped by the presence of a new hostile religious leader, Kai Wynn. This sees the show go straight into the Bajoran political and religious storyline. This would always be an integral element to the storytelling of DS9, but the audience would have some feedback after these earlier seasons and instances when Bajor was firmly front and centre. The focus of the show would change a little bit further down the line to put some distance between itself and the plight of Bajor. While episodes like the trio starting with Homecoming were well received, the sometimes generally mixed response to times like this where the show would go full Bajor would encourage a drive for some new ideas for what the show would ultimately be about. Something really impactful about the trio of episodes that opened the second season is that it would encourage the showrunner's appetite for serialized storytelling, seeing plot lines and events stretched over a longer span of episodes. The success of this opening gambit of storytelling for the second season would lay the groundwork for what DS9 would become known for: a rejection of the reset button and embracing persistent through lines as the show moved on. It also showed it could make the ongoing politics within its setting interesting and could really toy with the traditionally clear-cut morality of Star Trek. This is an example of the show walking with some ideas that it would eventually break into a sprint with further down the line. This is where the morally ambivalent, politically literate, serialized storytelling style that would define DS9 and other iterations of Trek truly began. There's a couple of honourable mentions for Season 2. Season 2, Episode 7, Rules of Acquisition. This is the first mention of the Dominion. A Dominion member race with whom Quark wishes to trade describes this powerful, controlling force within the Gamma Quadrant. Additional mentions are made in Sanctuary and Shadowplay before we meet this force for real. Season 2, Episode 23. This is the first foray into the mirror universe encountered in the original show. The dark, campy, violent, alternative universe really fits with Deep Space Nine, and they would go back often, telling increasingly outrageous and action-packed tales as the crew dipped out of their own familiar setting and into this bizarro world. Defining moment number 3, Season 2, Episode 26, the Gem Hada. We meet the true face of the Gamma Quadrant, the Dominion. There was an understanding from the writers that the Gamma Quadrant would need a face, an identity. As the other shows flew around encountering anyone and anything, then zooming off for a new story, DS9 would be staying put, so whatever was on the other side of that wormhole had to be fleshed out, and it had to be interesting. With the final episode of Season 2, what starts off as a knockabout comedy episode becomes a deadly encounter with a brand new antagonist, the Anti-Federation, known as the Dominion. The Dominion was shown to be an extremely dangerous presence. That they destroy a Galaxy-class ship, the Odyssey, without much trouble is intentional. If it were the Enterprise, the result would have been the same. From this episode on, DS9's role would change to become the Sentinel against this threat from the Gamma Quadrant. The show would have a greater sense of danger, feature more action, and this new presence would define everything in the show from this point forward. Defining moment number 4, Season 3, Episode 1, The Search, Parts 1 and 2. A showrunner leaves, the founders are seen, the show picks a direction, and yes, the Defiant is introduced. The changes made at the start of Season 3 were monumental. Don't worry, we'll get to the Defiant, but a singularly show-shaping moment is the departure of someone behind the camera. Trek's head honcho at the time, Rick Berman, would leave the team at DS9 to join Star Trek Voyager. Berman was a Roddenberry loyalist, favouring all of the tenets that the Great Bird had envisioned for his show. This made him a fan of episodic television, where individual stories would hit a reset button at the end and wrap up neatly. He was reticent to embrace conflict in storylines and was generally much more keen on the more wholesome, morally certain ideals espoused by previous iterations of Trek. When Berman left to take over as principal showrunner for Voyager, the reins for DS9 were handed to Ronald D. Moore and Ira Stephen Bear. Much more enthusiastic about exploring the dark and gritty, and using continuity-based storytelling to do it, the two new showrunners would eagerly strive to make the tales told in this series more continuous and contentious. This is when the creative team for Deep Space Nine really were let off the leash. The biggest and coolest on-screen development for Season 3 was the introduction of the Defiant. Not only was this the introduction of a much more functional ship for the station to use, it looked like no other Federation vessel, and it was geared towards combat. In the story, the first Federation warship was designed by Benjamin Sisko to fight the Borg. It was assigned to the station so they might be able to more effectively tackle whatever the Dominion would throw at them. It was to be used to contact the rulers of the Dominion, a task made easier with its cloaking device. Gene Roddenberry had always insisted the Federation don't sneak around, so in the story, the device is provided by the Romulans based on their curiosity about the Dominion's situation. Behind the scenes, the creative team had wanted something more substantial than the parking shuttles that were the runabouts. The intent was to have something with which they could take more characters on sustained journeys into the Gamma Quadrant. It would provide more options and creative avenues for the show to take. Like the show itself, this new vessel should look and feel unique from what had come before. The design was ultimately based on an unused concept sketch of a Marquis freighter, and this tough little ship was intended to be called the Valiant, which producers didn't want to cause confusion since there was another prominent V ship in the Trekverse, Voyager. Other developments of note are the meeting of the Founders, the race to which Odo is finally confirmed to belong. They are a unique, insidious and merciless force to be reckoned with. They are the true masters of the Dominion and the real villains for the rest of the show's run. A new character, Tyrell, was intended to be a series regular, but they didn't really have the storytelling material to sustain her. The actor, Martha Hackett, was transferred to Voyager to serve as the villainous Seska. Michael Eddington was introduced to the cast, ready to be put to use if Colin Meaney's film career should leave a lingering hole where Chief O'Brien used to be. With a brand new adversary of their own on the board and a freer reign to tell stories the way they liked, the new showrunners would take on board fan feedback that encouraged more action and adventure, and a paring back of the in-depth Bajoran, religious and political through lines. There would be moments that would resonate through the rest of the show, like the Cardassian and Romulans' disastrous attempt at an alpha strike against the Dominion. Sisko is finally promoted to captain, at the behest of the showrunners who felt he deserved to stand amongst those who had come before him in the franchise. A really nice technical touch is the change in the cinematography, with new DOP Jonathan West using telephoto lenses. You could see the backgrounds in the shots more clearly in scenes, a poetic development that came with both the showrunners and characters feeling increasingly at home with the station and show. Defining moment number 5, Season 4, Episode 1, The Way of the Warrior. There's a major new character who joins. The Klingons take over from the Dominion as the bad guys for a while, and we get a slick new look for the show's lead. The start of Season 4 is yet another season starter that would shake things up and bring innovations and fresh ideas that would become integral to the show's DNA. There was some kind of decree from the studio that broadly asked for a fresh new chapter for the show, and they responded by kicking off with an action-packed season opener, Way of the Warrior. It's a hugely confident start to this new chapter for the show, and it would see long-standing Federation allies, the Klingons, embrace their antagonistic side. They would wage war against Cardassia, and this dragged them into conflict with Starfleet. The biggest news here was that this would lead to the introduction of legacy character Commander Worf, as well as a new continuing character, General Martok. Well, sort of. Martok is a changeling, but we don't know that at the moment. This all provides a canvas for a lot of action and intrigue. Worf fits in perfectly with the setting and cast of DS9. He gets a lot more development than he did even on Next Generation. His relationships and storylines will make him much more than just a supporting role who's here to boost ratings. There was a change to the title sequence, a punchier variation of the theme, and new visuals that would indicate that this wasn't the almost desolate outpost away from the heart of things anymore. Sisko's actor, Avery Brooks, was allowed to change his hairstyle. The objection that he may look too aggressive or similar to his previous role of Hawk on Spender for Hire, no, I don't know what that is either, was dropped by the senior producers. Several crew members were promoted thanks to the introduction of Worf, and Siddig Al-Fadl changed his credit name to Alexander Siddig. The show just really felt confident in its new direction from this point on. All the core elements would be in place and DS9 really had finally found its lane by this point. Time again for some honourable mentions. Season 4, Episode 11, Homefront. We see the Federation almost turn against itself, and Odo is infected by a disease that is deadly to his species. This will become very important later on, and we don't even know that it's happened at this point. Season 4, Episode 22, Sneaky Vorta Wayun is introduced. Let's face it, his duplicitousness and generally slimy demeanour makes him a recurring villain worthy of note. Season 5, Episode 1, Apocalypse Rising. The Federation and Klingons reach a détente, and the Dominion are back in the forefront as the true big bads for our heroes and the Alpha Quadrant. Definitive moment number 6. Season 5, Episode 3, Trials and Tribulations. This is an absolute triumph of special effects, comedy and fan service. It's a joyously silly but essential episode of the show, and Star Trek in general. For the 30th anniversary of the franchise, there were plans to celebrate the moment across different formats. The Deep Space Nine team were kindly told, yeah, you guys can come up with something if you want or whatever. So they made the lukewarm permission to do something another chance to prove themselves. The cast of Deep Space Nine are thrown back in time to the events of the original series episode, The Trouble with Tribbles. This works so well. It's such a monumental undertaking, but it fires on all cylinders. Even the framing device, featuring a visit from the Federation Department of Temporal Investigators, is an interesting and fun idea. Deep Space Nine would do depth and darkness so well, but it really could turn its hand to anything and succeed. DS9 would go on to evolve the type of special effects used in the franchise and how they would integrate into the storytelling, and Tribulations was something of a watershed moment as far as that kind of thing goes. Plus, it's just an immensely enjoyable moment in the show and the franchise as a whole. Honourable mentions. Season 5, Episode 5, The Assignment. The Par Wraiths are introduced. These are the evil demons to the Prophet's angels, and they would take a more significant role towards the end of the series. Season 5, Episode 13, For the Uniform. Cisco literally commits a war crime by rendering a planet uninhabitable. It's to stop the Marquis rogue Eddington, but wow, it's quite a measure to take. Wouldn't be the last time he does something like this either, but we'll get into that later. Season 5, Episode 15, By Inferno's Light and In Purgatory's Shadow. The Cardassians join forces with the Dominion, and the real Bashir and Martok return to their rightful place in the Alpha Quadrant. Season 5, Episode 16, Dr. Bashir, I presume. This is an episode that would ultimately be a catalyst for some new story tangents, including a look at the place socially and neurally divergent people have in Federation society. Also, it's the events of this episode that would gain the attention of a certain section of Starfleet, specifically the one known as 31. Season 5, Episode 19, Blaze of Glory. The anti-Cardassian resistance, the Marquis, are effectively wiped out, and Michael Eddington is killed. Season 5, Episode 26, A Call to Arms. Open war is declared between the Federation and the Dominion in a truly amazing episode. Definitive Moment 7. Season 6, Episode 1, A Time to Stand. A 6-season arc sees the Dominion War take centre stage. Season 6 starts with a multi-episode arc as our heroes join the fight against the Dominion. There's a race against time before the Dominion can dismantle the measures taken to prevent them receiving reinforcements through the wormhole. Back in Season 2, the showrunners dabbled with multi-episode arcs beyond the familiar two-parter events, and this is the next step in the evolution of that process. With additional writers brought in, the season takes the risk of not placing the characters immediately back on DS9, instead following the resistance efforts of characters like Quark and Kira, while showing what's happening beyond the station and the broader war effort. A lot happens. We get some insidious manipulation of Odo from the female shapeshifter, we see how poorly Starfleet is faring against the Dominion forces, and there's a valiant effort to retake the station. Cisco's role as emissary of the Prophets of Bajor becomes a key factor, and the Dominion are cut off from the Gamma Quadrant. By the end, the crew would be back on the station, Dukat was captured, and his daughter Zial was dead. There are some pacing issues. The Klingon-centric Sons and Daughters shows a Klingon's perspective of the war against the Dominion, but it doesn't progress the overall arc. The same could arguably be said for the second part of the arc, Rocks and Shoals, though it is still absolutely one of the best episodes of the series, in my opinion. However, this 6-series run invigorated the showrunners to embrace these types of arcs and serialized storytelling in general, and it proved to generally be a success. This would continue to shape DS9 and all of Trek in the future, with subsequent shows like Discovery and Picard being entirely serialized. It should also be noted that Season 6 saw the show go all in with CGI. The technology had caught up with the ambition, and while Trek had been a stalwart of practical effects, Voyager had been a successful testbed for computer-generated imagery. The demands of the sequences the DS9 team wanted to portray meant the "we love practical models" philosophy had to change. The flexibility and scope of CGI would have to be fully embraced if the audience was to see the ambitious, complex and visually dynamic fleet battles demanded of the story. This was the point at which we would see bold new strides in the storytelling style and the effects used to bring these stories to life. Honourable mentions: Season 6 Episode 7, You Are Cordially Invited. Worf and Dax get married. We also get to see a party in Star Trek that's actually fun, with people dancing and cutting loose. Interesting fact, the showrunners wanted the Yorktown to always be around for this kind of thing. They loved the idea of there being a bona fide party ship that would always bring the fun to the final frontier. Season 6, Episode 11, Waltz. Gul Dukat was a popular villain. Too popular. The team were very proud to have multifaceted bad guys, but a little uncomfortable with people being genuinely enthusiastic about a genocidal dictator, hence the episode Waltz. This was intended to display that, yeah, Gul Dukat is an insane psychopath. Stop liking him so much. Season 6, Episode 18, Far Beyond the Stars. This is the first use of a blatant, genuine racial slur in Star Trek. Definitive Moment 8. Season 6, Episode 19, In the Pale Moonlight. This is about as dark as Sisko gets. If Deep Space Nine was defined by a darker tone and pushing Starfleet ideals beyond their boundaries, this is the pinnacle of such things. It could be argued that also sort of happens in For the Uniform, but this is the more in-depth and rationalized instance of a Starfleet officer, in this case Sisko again, pretty much willingly committing an atrocity. With the Dominion inflicting unsustainable casualties against the Federation's forces, Sisko intends to turn the Romulans from facilitators of the Gamma Quadrant's forces to willing combatants against them on the side of the Federation and Klingons. Inviting Garak to assist and tentatively admitting to be willing to go as far as it takes to get the desired result, Sisko would admit he knew things were bound to get messy. There are some really interesting aspects to the episode. A framing device of a log entry where Sisko bares his soul and describes what happened allows him to break the fourth wall and speak directly to the audience. As he does, he has a whiskey or two to calm his nerves. Roddenberry had been explicit in never wanting to see alcohol as something a Starfleet officer would turn to for refuge or desperation. In the story, Sisko commits fraud to encourage an entire people to fight and die in place of the people of Starfleet. He bribes Quark to pervert the course of justice. He orders his doctor to provide a prohibited substance for illegal reasons. He threatens to allow a forger to be tortured and falsely imprisons them, and Sisko is implicitly involved in an assassination. Against his will and without his knowledge, Garak rather convincingly questions that. While modern Trek would willfully engage in sometimes brutal and rather overwrought attempts to subvert Trek's morality, Sisko still feels like a Starfleet officer throughout this whole ordeal. We're just seeing things get done that aren't exactly going to be proudly spoken of in the annual Starfleet Federation brochure. In narrative terms, the tide of the war effort changes, with the Romulans providing an escalation of the conflict and definitive stalling of the Dominion's largely successful assault against the Alpha Quadrant. It's the kind of moment that would probably bring a cheer and a sigh of relief from the beleaguered forces and people suffering the relentless assault. But we get to see the shocking ethical cost of what it took to achieve this turning point. Honourable mentions. Season 6, Episode 20, His Way. Odo and Kira get romantically involved. We're also introduced to a recurring character, Vic Fontaine. This also sees DS9 start to delve into the sorts of holodeck adventures the show had evaded until now, and it also brings in impromptu musical numbers. I don't know why. Season 6, Episode 21, The Reckoning. The Power Wraiths are back, and this time with teeth. The writers felt that the Power Wraiths had been taken out far too easily, so bring them back here, and they play a big role until the end of the show. Season 6, Episode 26, Tears of the Prophets. The wormhole is seemingly destroyed, and even more shockingly, Jadzia Dax is killed off. There was some fallout with actress Terry Farrell behind the scenes, and it wound up that no one was happy with this development. It made for some obvious changes going into the final season. Season 7, Episode 1, Ezri Dax is introduced. Season 7, Episode 11, It's Only a Paper Moon. I had to mention this, it's a stunning episode about depression, post-traumatic stress, and this alone pretty much justifies the existence of the character Vic Fontaine. Season 7, Episode 16, Inter Arma Enim Silent Leges. This is the last standalone episode of the show. Season 7, Episode 17, Penumbra. The final moments of Deep Space Nine begin here, with a 10-episode arc finishing with the finale. Season 7, Episode 20, The Defiant is destroyed, possibly bringing tears to many viewers' eyes. Definitive Moment 9, Season 7, Episodes 25 and 26, What We Leave Behind. Deep Space Nine concludes. In the final episode, the Resistance on Cardassia Prime and the assembled Allied Starfleet forces engage in a final fight to the death or victory. It's a rollercoaster ride with twists and turns, ultimately seeing the Cardassians join the Federation and the Dominion finally defeated. With Odo saving his people and trying to impart a new philosophy of not trying to kill everyone you come across, the Power Wraiths, embodied by a possessed Dukat, have a final showdown with the Prophet of Bajor, leaving Benjamin Sisko missing in action. The final shot of Kira and Jake looking into the depths of space, the shot presented with an uncertain tone, maybe melancholy, maybe hopeful, is a perfect final moment for Deep Space Nine. Definitive Moment 10, Beyond the Finale. Deep Space Nine's legacy to Trek and sci-fi. Through its run, Deep Space Nine took a lot of risks. First and foremost, it tackled the story of an ongoing war. Trek's creator was always keen to not show continuing conflict, or to turn the horrors of war into cheap entertainment. DS9 presented the war as something costly and full of horror and ethical compromise. It did also provide some big-budget, pulse-pounding action sequences. The debate goes back and forth. Some say DS9 betrayed Roddenberry's intent to portray a brighter future steeped in optimism, but fans of the series passionately believe it brought an unprecedented depth and maturity to the franchise. It certainly had some bold experiments that would shape every other iteration of Star Trek moving forward, except Voyager, the showrunners of which stubbornly and pointedly refused to even consider the path that DS9 had forged. There's a whole story behind that which could be a video in and of itself. Objectively, Deep Space Nine brought some flexibility into the ethically and tonally pristine Federation, and this would be embraced from Enterprise onwards. Special effects in the Trekverse made the leap to fully embracing CGI with this show, and the more modern, serialized storytelling method was tentatively tried and shown to be a huge success here. The whole concept of refraining from boldly going anywhere was a huge gambit, and they made it work, meaning that Trek could work even if it wasn't the wagon train to the stars that Roddenberry initially pitched. The defining moments of Deep Space Nine are truly the most significant, defining moments of the franchise. The series about the less than squeaky clean inhabitants of an alien station on the fringes of the final frontier, stood on the shoulders of giants, but made the most of its opportunity to see beyond the established horizons.